Are you experiencing recurring situations that you react to rather than respond? This is called a trigger.
Is your reaction to a situation greater than the situation itself? This is making a mountain out of a molehill.
Well, what if you could change or reverse that whole dynamic? Because if you don't, your situation is controlling you rather than you controlling the situation. In this video, you're going to learn how to take your power back. So what we get to do is recognize when we are triggered. That means we get to become aware of what we've been unaware of. In other words, I am willing to now raise my level of awareness so I can at least recognize, hey, I'm triggered.
I was with some people once counseling them, and the woman's response to a situation going on was out of control. It was so major to the situation and the circumstance that she must recognize that that is a trigger. And once she began to realize that that was coming from within herself, she began to calm down and was able to see that she was over-responding to that situation.
Have you ever been in that situation? You just recognize, wow, I'm acting a little freaky here because the situation is not that bad, but I'm so upset. Could you just give a little comment there? If this is like I'm telling your story, a thumbs up, a comment or something along those lines. That way we'll know we're tracking with you, because today we're going to really give you some great tools to help you when you realize, whoops, I'm triggered.
You know, Yana, I think it's important that first of all, we have to recognize the trigger. And a lot of times people don't understand a reoccurring pattern in their life is representing something that is happening inside of them rather than the circumstance that is external, that it's coming internal first to the external.
So the first thing we do, and listen, you're going to want to wait to the very end to get the whole message and the key point we're going to give you at the very end. So the first point is that we are willing to recognize it. We're like, oh yeah, I'm triggered. That gives us a chance to regain control. And once we do that, we can redirect.
I think it's like the story of Jonah. Jonah receives this great call to go to Nineveh. It's a very simple thing that the Lord is asking him to do. Go to Nineveh and preach the greatest revival that has ever occurred on earth, where the whole city will be saved. But his reaction to the call was total opposite of that call.
Well, let me tell you what the rabbis say about this. And it's an ancient story. It's ancient literature. And I love that the rabbis have recorded this information for us, because if we don't understand how Jonah was triggered, then we miss the whole point of the story. It's not that Jonah was a bad guy and he's like, no thanks God, I got something else to do.
Right.
The story is this, that when Jonah was growing up, the Assyrians were always at war with Israel. And the Assyrians were not nice. They're the ones who came up with certain swords that were curved so that when they used them against someone, there was a lot of damage and a lot of destruction. And they came into Jonah's village when he was really young. And his mother and father had already passed. So he was being raised by his grandmother, and his sister was with him. Well, Jonah was a little boy, so they held Jonah outside while they killed his grandmother and sister and hung them on a pole. The very people that Adonai calls and says, Jonah, get up and go to Nineveh. It was the Ninevites that had done that to his family. Jonah is, you talk about a trigger. Now come on, that's a trigger.
That's a
And
trigger.
he's like, no. I'm going as far, Tarshish is the farthest point away from Nineveh in that time period known in the world. He wasn't just like, yeah, forget it. He was, I'm out of here. Talk about a trigger. And so for you, you might begin identifying some things right now that when such and such happens, this situation or that situation, oh man, I have a big emotional response.
I think it's important we understand when we see those patterns start cropping up in our life, rather than looking at them as circumstances that are to blame others, we take a step back from it and begin to say, okay, is this something in me or is it something in them? And when we can look at it and recognize that it really is something in us. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the trigger and we wouldn't react to a circumstance the way we're reacting.
In other words, you can't have a reaction unless it is within you, because the reaction is coming from within you. And even when someone else does something that's similar, and look, you just don't like it, but you don't like it because there's a situation in the earlier part of your life that brought some real discomfort. And so, number one, recognition. Number two, redirecting. Now, here's this thing back to the story of Jonah. We don't want to wait till a big fish swallows us and then throws us up on the ground to get redirected. You and I all want to be in control of our vessel. We don't want circumstances to have that kind of power over us. So here is the key. Here is the big fish that if we can do it now, we don't have to wait for that fish later. It's called realignment. And hang on, this is a big statement. The fault you find in others lies first within you. That's how come you can see it.
You know, Jonah, we can see this within him. His first reaction is, I am not going to Nineveh. I am going to get as far away from Nineveh as I can. Why? Because he didn't want to obey the Lord? Absolutely not. But it was because of what he carried internally against the very ones who had slaughtered his family and his friends inside that village. And so the blame was against the Ninevites, but it was triggered from within him because of the harboring those emotions inside.
And look what the Ninevites did. Jonah, which his name in Hebrew means the dove, so that tells you his temperament.
Right.
Very sensitive guy.
Very.
He wasn't this great guy with tons of bravado and ego and stuff. He was a very sensitive guy. He goes and says 4 words, and that whole city repents and comes to faith in the one true God.
But he could only do that after he had dealt with himself, because inside the fish, inside the circumstance that Yahweh that allowed for him to get in, he began to repent. He began to take it on himself and no longer was the victim. He became the victor.
Oh, that's what we want. So our 3 points are this. We're going to recognize that we're triggered. And that means I am choosing to become aware of what I've been unaware of. I am redirecting from blaming them and why did they do that and they don't care about me and didn't they listen, on and on. I'm redirecting that back to myself and I'm realigning with myself. I'm allowing those hurt parts of me for the Lord to come in and heal.
Remember, if there's one takeaway for you today, it's this: that you become aware that your reaction to a situation is greater than the situation itself, that it's time to take your power back and no longer be a victim to your circumstance, but be a victor.
If you've experienced short attention span, outburst of anger, lack of focus or clarity due to excessive thinking, watch this next video to learn how to break that habit.
It's been wonderful being with you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
We are the Hebrew Sisters at HebrewScrollsAcademy.com.